Welcome to my presentation on election security. Over the last couple of months or so, election security has become a large part of the political sphere. Before the election, many Americans wondered how the U.S. government would be able to keep an election secure during the COVID-19 pandemic. After the election, current President Donald Trump filed lawsuits stating that the election had not been secure, leading to the victory of his opponent, President-elect Joe Biden. While all of these lawsuits have been dropped due to little merit, it still begs an interesting question for many Americans. Should we worry about election security, and what goes on behind the scenes to keep our elections secure? How do we keep our elections secure? We start with voter registration. Voter registration is the foundation to keeping our elections secure. Registering voters beforehand saves a large amount of time during the voting process. It removes the need for voters to register on election day, which would create an even slower process. Voter registration also allows voter numbers to be pre-identified. This helps remove the risk of voters casting multiple votes or impersonating another voter. Voter registration produces a list of eligible voters, which helps further secure a person's right to vote. How can voters register to vote? Voters can register online, by mail, or in person. Voter registration asks voters essential questions such as their driver's license or state ID number and the last four digits of the voter's social security number. This information is used to validate the voter and to validate that the voter is eligible to vote and secures that voter impersonation is very difficult. It's time for voters to cast their votes. Voters can cast their votes by mail-in voting, voting early, or by voting in person on election day. If voters choose to vote by mail, also known as absentee voting, election officials will send them their vote by mail ballots between 35 and 28 days before the election. Voters then have till 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. on election day to vote, depending on their county. If voters choose to vote early, they can attend any polling place in their county. They must show up with a valid voter ID, such as a driver's license. Voters have between the 10th and the 3rd days before an election to vote early. If voters wish to vote in person, they must bring their voter identification to their assigned polling place between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on election day. Voters are then able to cast their ballots on election day. Mail-in voting was a large topic during the 2020 presidential campaign. Republicans and Democrats shared widely different views on the importance and safety of mail-in voting. Democrats urged voters to vote early with the use of absentee ballots, while Republicans urged that mail-in voting could not be trusted. The different viewpoints showed in a survey taken before the election by the Pew Research Center. 51% of registered voters who plan to vote for or lean towards voting for Democrat Joe Biden said they plan to cast their vote by mail, in comparison to Donald Trump's 25%. Did those voters have to worry about ballot security? Mail-in ballots contain many different techniques to guarantee voter security. Ballots first protect against tampering. Ballots are paper and marked by hand. Due to the hand marking, any changes are easily noticed. Mail-in ballots are also sent via sealed envelopes. Any attempt to tamper with the ballot inside would break the seal. Ballots that have broken or ripped seals are placed under investigation. Video security is also put in place while the ballots are both in storage and in the counting phase to further secure that no tampering has been done. To prevent mail-in voter fraud, voters must individually request their mail-in ballots. Voters who request mail-in ballots are then cross-referenced with the voter registration database. Voters are then sent individualized ballots with barcodes and security number specific to that voter. This barcode helps voting offices make sure that there are no duplicate ballots. Finally, to eliminate ballot stuffing, a situation where there are more cast votes than the number of registered voters, the election office has a secure list of all registered voters and all registered voters who requested a mail-in ballot. They update this list when a mail-in ballot is cast, ensuring that a voter who sent the mail-in ballot in will not be able to vote again. One of the large topics before the 2020 election, the security of mail-in voting. With many Americans voting by mail in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Americans pondered at the security of mail-in voting. Yes, mail-in voting is secure. You need not worry about the security of your vote if you vote by mail. With all the safety features previously mentioned, mail-in voting is a secure way to uphold our democracy. Considerably less people voted in person on Election Day in 2020 than in 2016. The COVID-19 pandemic played a large part in how Americans voted. However, according to an article by the Pew Research Center, the amount of Americans voting on Election Day has greatly decreased over the course of the last 20 years. While voting in person is the traditional form of voting, it has become less and less traditional. Now, in-person voting centers use either electronic voting systems or electronic vote counters to count and record all the votes cast at each voting center. Many people wonder how the polls are able to keep voting secure when over 200 million Americans are eligible to vote. In-person voting has changed over the years. Now votes are cast electronically on voting machines or by traditional paper votes that are then recorded electronically by counting machines. While this move to technology has increased the speed of voting and decreased the time it takes to count votes, many Americans have begun to question the security of electronic voting machines in the age of internet hackers and global cybersecurity threats. There are many different regulations and protocols put in place to keep in-person voting secure. Similar to mail-in voting, every voter must register to vote and attend their assigned poll on Election Day. This prevents voters from casting multiple votes and helps keep track of who has voted. Only certain authorized personnel have access to the registry to keep the information and data of individual voters safe. To prevent attacks that involve security of electronic polling devices, these devices are kept at secure locations before Election Day to prevent anyone from stealing one and learning how to hack the system. These machines are also forbidden from connecting to the internet, as another measure of security, making it impossible to hack a machine over internet connection. All of these security features have not always been in place. Elections have been controversial before, due to many different schemes and attempts to change election outcomes through illegitimate ways. Starting in 1888, in the election, President Grover Cleveland ran against Senator Benjamin Harrison. During this time, many voters were known for willingly selling their votes to buyers. Harrison had appointed William Dudley as the treasurer for the Republican National Committee. Dudley then sent letters to local Republican officials promising them funds to pay for the votes of these so-called floaters, with the goal that they could buy votes for the Republican Party. The Democratic Party then received word of these letters and exposed Dudley, creating a massive upstorm days before the election. Despite the purchases of votes, Grover Cleveland still went on to win the election. In 1960, in an extremely close election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, many Republicans argued that there was tampering in places such as southern Texas and Chicago. If Nixon had won Texas and Illinois, he would have won the election. However, Nixon did not contest the results and ended up running for president again in 1968 and winning. Most recently, in 2000, many states were still using outdated punch card forms of voting. These punch card forms of voting had created problems before. Before Election Day, the media discovered a ballot called a butterfly ballot that confused thousands of voters in Florida. Voters who thought they had casted a vote for Democrat Al Gore had instead voted for the other candidate, or for two candidates on accident. Gore ended up losing Florida to Bush by just 537 votes. Ultimately, the votes were contested by Gore in court. Over 60,000 votes had gone uncounted due to hanging chads. Hanging chads were a result of a hole punch, still leaving the punched out paper hanging. These votes went uncounted. Gore ultimately lost this case because it was not decided by the deadline of December 12th, meaning there was no more time to recount the votes. In government, as in life, we learn from our mistakes. In the incident that happened in 1888, votes were now kept private. This would prevent anyone from being able to securely pay for voters. By keeping votes private, any would-be vote buyers would be deterred because there would be no way to confirm that the vote they had purchased go towards the party they wanted. The 1960 incident opened the government eyes to how close elections could be and helped introduce the need for more accurate polling methods. The hanging chads of the 2000 election created public awareness to the necessity of an updated polling system. While voting is more secure than ever, there are still many things that we can do to improve voter security and overall voter experience. According to a JSTOR article, voting reform is a necessity. With many polling machines being over 10 years old, it is vital that we update our voting system to keep voting secure. However, the article did mention that it believes the cost of replacing all paperless voting machines would range between $130 million and $400 million. Yet it is a small price to pay for the security of the voice of the American people. Another key way to improve overall voter experience is to change the voting day or to make Election Day a national holiday. Election Day lands on a Tuesday, and Tuesday is no longer a convenient time for the American people, with many work complications. Changing Election Day would increase voter engagement and voter security. By changing Election Day, voters would be more likely to vote on Election Day, which would decrease the different number of options for voting, making the voting process simpler for both voters and polling places, which would allow for further effort to be put into maintaining voter security. Finally, voting is secure. There are many different forms of security measures put in place to ensure that the American democracy fairly and accurately represents the voice of the American people. You should feel confident casting your vote. However, there is always room for improvement. Voter security should remain a top priority as we move towards the future. Updates to polling machines and how we cast our votes are vital. The world is changing, and so should voting. However, when it comes to voter security, as of 2020, you need not worry. Now we get to the references. To start, we had the Pew Research Center. I used this article to talk about voter engagement for mail-in voting, early voting, and in-person voting. Then we have theconversation.com. This article supplied information on mail-in voting and mail-in voting security. The Election Assistance Commission provided information on the behind-the-scenes workings of mail-in voting. Then I have the first JSTOR article. This talks largely of the importance of mail-in voting and the value that mail-in voting plays in the current elections and political sphere. Then we have a Brennan Center. This discusses the security features of mail-in voting. I use this primarily to talk about the different ways that mail-in voting is kept secure and the different methods that the government uses. Then we have another Pew Research article. This discusses how in-person voting has declined over the years. We get to the Smithsonian. This discusses elections and the election issues of the past. Finally, we have our second JSTOR article. This discusses the importance of the voting reform. This is where I got the information on the cost to improve voting systems. And lastly, we have a article by Vox. This includes different ways that the voting system can be improved beyond the JSTOR article. That is my final exam presentation. Thank you for watching and listening. May you all cast your votes confidently, as you should know that the government is keeping them all secure with their best efforts. Thank you.